Osama bin Laden's full name, Osama bin Muhammad bin Awad bin Laden, means, Osama, son of Muhammad, son of Awad, son of Laden. Muhammad refers to bin Laden's father Muhammad bin Laden, Awad refers to his grandfather, Awad bin Aboud bin Laden, a Kindite Hadrami tribesman. Laden therefore refers to bin Laden's great-great-grandfather, Laden Ali al-Qahtani. He was named Usama, meaning lion, after Usama ibn Zayd, one of the companions of Muhammad. Osama bin Laden had assumed the kunya, technonym, Abu Abdal, meaning father of Abdullah. The Arabic linguistic convention would be to refer to him as Osama or Osama bin Laden, not bin Laden alone, as bin Laden is a patronymic, not a surname in the Western manner. According to one of his sons Omar, the family's hereditary surname is al-Khan, but bin Laden's father, Muhammad bin Laden, never officially registered the name. Osama bin Laden was born on March 10, 1957 in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. His father, Muhammad bin Awad bin Laden, was a billionaire construction magnate with close ties to the Saudi royal family, and Muhammad bin Laden's 10th wife, Syrian Hamida al-Addaz, then called Alia Ghanem. In a 1998 interview, bin Laden gave his birth date as March 10, 1957. Despite it being generally accepted that bin Laden was born in Riyadh, his birthplace was listed as Jeddah in the initial FBI and Interpol documents. Muhammad bin Laden divorced Hamida soon after Osama bin Laden was born. Muhammad recommended Hamida to Muhammad al-Addaz, an associate. Al-Addaz married Hamida in the late 1950s or early 1960s. The couple had 4 children, and bin Laden lived in the new household with 3 half-brothers and 1 half-sister. The bin Laden family made $5 billion in the construction industry, of which Osama later inherited around $25 to $30 million. Bin Laden was raised as a devout Sunni Muslim. From 1968 to 1976, he attended the elite Al-Thajer Model School. He studied economics and business administration at King Abdulaziz University. Some reports suggest he earned a degree in civil engineering in 1979, or a degree in public administration in 1981. Bin Laden attended an English language course in Oxford, England, during 1971. One source described him as hard-working, another said he left university during his 3rd year without completing a college degree. At university, bin Laden's main interest was religion, where he was involved in both, interpreting the Quran and jihad, and charitable work. Other interests included writing poetry, reading, with the works of Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery and Charles de Gaulle said to be among his favorites, Black Stallions, and association football, in which he enjoyed playing at centre forward and followed the English club Arsenal. Nasser al-Bari, who was bin Laden's personal bodyguard from 1997 to 2001, details bin Laden's personal life in his memoir. He describes him as a frugal man and strict father, who enjoyed taking his large family on shooting trips and picnics in the desert. Bin Laden's father Muhammad died in 1967 in an airplane crash in Saudi Arabia when his American pilot Jim Harrington misjudged a landing. Bin Laden's eldest half-brother, Salem bin Laden, the subsequent head of the bin Laden family, was killed in 1988 near San Antonio, Texas, in the United States, when he accidentally flew a plane into power lines. The FBI described bin Laden as an adult as tall and thin, between 1.93 meters, 6 feet 4 inches, and 1.98 meters, 6 feet 6 inches, in height and weighing about 73 kilograms, 160 pounds, although the author Lawrence Wright, in his Pulitzer Prize-winning book on Al-Qaeda, The Looming Tower, writes that a number of bin Laden's close friends confirmed that reports of his height were greatly exaggerated, and that bin Laden was actually just over 6 feet, 1.8 meters, tall. Eventually, after his death, he was measured to be roughly 1.93 meters, 6 feet 4 inches. Bin Laden had an olive complexion and was left-handed, usually walking with a cane. He wore a plain white keffiyeh. Bin Laden had stopped wearing the traditional Saudi male keffiyeh and instead wore the traditional Yemeni male keffiyeh. Bin Laden was described as soft-spoken and mild-mannered in demeanor. A major component of bin Laden's ideology was the concept that civilians from enemy countries, including women and children, were legitimate targets for jihadists to kill, according to former CIA analyst Michael Scheuer, who led the CIA's hunt for Osama bin Laden. The al-Qaeda leader was motivated by a belief that U.S. foreign policy has oppressed, killed, or otherwise harmed Muslims in the Middle East. As such, the threat to U.S. national security arises not from al-Qaeda being offended by what the U.S. is but rather by what the U.S. does, or in the words of Scheuer, they, al-Qaeda, hate us, Americans, for what we do, not who we are. Nonetheless, bin Laden criticized the U.S. for its secular form of governance, calling upon Americans to convert to Islam and reject the immoral acts of fornication, homosexuality, intoxicants, gambling, and usury, in a letter published in late 2002. Bin Laden believed that the Islamic world was in crisis and that the complete restoration of Sharia law would be the only way to set things right in the Muslim world. He opposed such alternatives as secular government, as well as pan-Arabism, socialism, communism, and democracy. He subscribed to the Athari, literalist, school of Islamic theology. These beliefs, in conjunction with violent jihad, have sometimes been called Qutbism after being promoted by Syed Qutb. Bin Laden believed that Afghanistan, under the rule of Mullah Omar's Taliban, was the only Islamic country in the Muslim world. Bin Laden consistently dwelt on the need for violent jihad to right what he believed were injustices against Muslims perpetrated by the United States and sometimes by other non-Muslim states. He also called for the elimination of Israel, and called upon the United States to withdraw all of its civilians and military personnel from the Middle East, as well as from every Islamic country of the world. His viewpoints and methods of achieving them had led to him being designated as a terrorist by scholars, journalists from the New York Times, the BBC, and Qatari news station Al Jazeera, analysts such as Peter Bergen, Michael Scheuer, Mark Sageman, and Bruce Hoffman. He was indicted on terrorism charges by law enforcement agencies in Madrid, New York City, and Tripoli. In 1997, he condemned the United States for its hypocrisy in not labeling the bombing of Hiroshima as terrorism. In November 2001, he maintained that the revenge killing of Americans was justified because he claimed that Islamic law allows believers to attack invaders even when the enemy uses human shields. However, according to Rodenbeck, this classical position was originally intended as a legal justification for the accidental killings of civilians under very limited circumstances, not as a basis for the intentional targeting of non-combatants. A few months later in a 2002 letter, he made no mention of this justification but claimed that since the United States is a democracy, all citizens bear responsibility for its government's actions, and civilians are therefore fair targets. Bin Laden's overall strategy for achieving his goals against much larger enemies such as the Soviet Union and United States was to lure them into a long war of attrition in Muslim countries, attracting large numbers of jihadists who would never surrender. He believed this would lead to economic collapse of the enemy countries, by bleeding them dry. Al-Qaeda manuals express this strategy. In a 2004 tape broadcast by Al Jazeera, Bin Laden spoke of bleeding America to the point of bankruptcy. A number of errors and inconsistencies in Bin Laden's arguments have been alleged by authors such as Max Rodenbeck and Noah Feldman. He invoked democracy both as an example of the deceit and fraudulence of Western political system, American law being the law of the rich and wealthy, and as the reason civilians are responsible for their government's actions and so can be lawfully punished by death. He denounced democracy as a religion of ignorance that violates Islam by issuing man-made laws, but in a later statement compares the Western democracy of Spain favorably to the Muslim world in which the ruler is accountable. Rodenbeck states, evidently, Bin Laden has never heard theological justifications for democracy, based on the notion that the will of the people must necessarily reflect the will of an all-knowing God. Bin Laden was heavily anti-Semitic, stating that most of the negative events that occurred in the world were the direct result of Jewish actions. In a December 1998 interview with Pakistani journalist Rahimullah Yousafzai, bin Laden stated that Operation Desert Fox was proof that Israeli Jews controlled the governments of the United States and the United Kingdom, directing them to kill as many Muslims as they could. In a letter released in late 2002, he stated that Jews controlled the civilian media outlets, politics, and economic institutions of the United States. In a May 1998 interview with ABC's John Miller, bin Laden stated that the Israeli state's ultimate goal was to annex the Arabian Peninsula and the Middle East into its territory and enslave its peoples, as part of what he called a Greater Israel. He stated that Jews and Muslims could never get along and that war was inevitable between them, and further accused the U.S. of stirring up anti-Islamic sentiment. He claimed that the U.S. State Department and U.S. Department of Defense were controlled by Jews, for the sole purpose of serving the Israeli state's goals. He often delivered warnings against alleged Jewish conspiracies. These Jews are masters of usury and leaders in treachery. They will leave you nothing, either in this world or the next. Shia Muslims have been listed along with heretics, the United States, and Israel as the four principal enemies of Islam at ideology classes of bin Laden's al-Qaeda organization. After this bombing, al-Qaeda was reported to have developed its justification for the killing of innocent people. According to a fatwa issued by Mamdouh Mahmoud Salim, the killing of someone standing near the enemy is justified because any innocent bystander will find a proper reward in death, going to Jannah, paradise, if they were good Muslims, and to Jahannam, hell, if they were bad or non-believers. The fatwa was issued to al-Qaeda members but not the general public. In the 1990s, bin Laden's al-Qaeda assisted jihadis financially and sometimes militarily in Algeria, Egypt, and Afghanistan. In 1992 or 1993, bin Laden sent an emissary, Kari El-Said, with $40,000 to Algeria to aid the Islamists and urge war rather than negotiation with the government. Their advice was heeded. The war that followed caused the deaths of 150,000 to 200,000 Algerians and ended with the Islamist surrender to the government. In January 1996, the CIA launched a new unit of its Counterterrorism Center, CTC, called Bin Laden Issue Station, codenamed Alex Station, to track and to carry out operations against bin Laden's activities. Bin Laden Issue Station was headed by Michael Scheuer, a veteran of the Islamic extremism branch of the CTC. Late 1990s attacks. It has been claimed that bin Laden funded the Luxor massacre of November 17, 1997, which killed 62 civilians, and outraged the Egyptian public. In mid-1997, the Northern Alliance threatened to overrun Jalalabad, causing bin Laden to abandon his Najm Jihad compound and move his operations to Tarnak farms in the south. Another successful attack was carried out in the city of Mazar-i-Sharif in Afghanistan. Bin Laden helped cement his alliance with the Taliban by sending several hundred Afghan Arab fighters along to help the Taliban kill between 5,000 and 6,000 Hazaras overrunning the city. In February 1998, Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri co-signed a fatwa in the name of the World Islamic Front for Jihad against Jews and Crusaders, which declared the killing of North Americans and their allies an individual duty for every Muslim to liberate Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem and the Grand Mosque in Mecca from their grip. At the public announcement, Fatwa bin Laden announced that North Americans are very easy targets. He told the attending journalists, "You will see the results of this in a very short time." Bin Laden and al-Zawahiri organized an al-Qaeda Congress on 24 June 1998. The 1998 U.S. Embassy bombings were a series of attacks that occurred on August 7, 1998, in which hundreds of people were killed in simultaneous truck bomb explosions at the United States embassies in the major East African cities of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Nairobi, Kenya. The attacks were linked to local members of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, and brought Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri to the attention of the United States public for the first time. Al-Qaeda later claimed responsibility for the bombings. In retaliation for the embassy bombings, President Bill Clinton ordered a series of cruise missile strikes on bin Laden-related targets in Sudan and Afghanistan on August 20, 1998. In December 1998, the director of Central Intelligence Counter-Terrorist Center reported to President Clinton that al-Qaeda was preparing for attacks in the United States of America, including the training of personnel to hijack aircraft. On June 7, 1999, the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation placed bin Laden on its 10 most wanted list. At the end of 2000, Richard Clarke revealed that Islamic militants headed by bin Laden had planned a triple attack on January 3, 2000, which would have included bombings in Jordan of the Radisson SAS Hotel in Amman, tourists at Mount Nebo, and a site on the Jordan River, as well as the sinking of the destroyer USS The Sullivans in Yemen, and an attack on a target within the United States. The plan was foiled by the arrest of the Jordanian terrorist cell, the sinking of the explosive-filled skiff intended to target the destroyer, and the arrest of Ahmed Ressam.